Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Worldhoppers. Today, we're going to be chatting about some spooky reads in time for Halloween, but also just the fall season. And if you watched our fall reads video, we structured it where, besides just giving recommendations, we also kind of talked about books that get recommended a lot this time of year, which ones we think are worth the hype, which ones we think are maybe a little overhyped. And so we're going to structure this one in a similar fashion. So the first topic here would be spooky books you think are overhyped. Even if you like them, are there some spooky books that you think get recommended maybe a little bit too much, or that you like it, but it's been hyped so much at this point that you feel like people are going to go in and be disappointed?
Are we starting with me?
Yeah, go ahead. You go first.
Personally, I think most things by Stephen King are really overhyped.
For
Not that
sure.
they're not good. I just am not a huge fan of Stephen King. So it's like it sucks when like full lists, more than half of them are made up of Stephen King books just because he's written so many books. But yeah, I think it's not even just one book, it's just him as an author is very overhyped.
That's fair. I mean, yeah, that's true that you see, because I find that if I'm looking for recommendations, I likely already know about, it's like with fantasy, you've heard of Sanderson and you've heard of Sarah J. Maas. And with horror, you've heard of Stephen King. So at some point you're like, what else though?
Yeah.
I always get a little bummed because if I'm looking for T. Kingfisher, it's always if I'm looking for her horror books, I'm always like, it's shelves and shelves of Stephen King.
Mhm.
I was like, all right, she should be around here. What about you, Ingrid?
So I'm gonna go something similar to what Steph said, but it's actually one of my favorite books, which is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying
Oh,
Vampires by Grady Hendrix. But I do think that people have different expectations of what the book is actually about. Because I also did, right? I went into it thinking, oh, this is just gonna be like a fun, like vampire-y story, and it has a lot like deeper themes to it. Um, so it's not as fun as you would think. There is some fun parts, like in terms of like spookiness and like there's a little bit of gory stuff, and the book club is also kind of fun, but it's a lot more about like race and classism and things like that. Which I think when people realize that, they kind of get like slightly annoyed, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know this is what it was going to be about." Um, but I also do think well, I guess I'll say that, and then I have another one by Grady Hendrix that I think might fall into one of the other um, prompts.
just go ahead. We'll go right into it. Is
Okay,
it one
so
you
the
think is
Final Girl Support Group, I think, is a book that is super overhyped, but that I really disliked.
I DNF'd it.
Oh my god,
I
it's
heard
so bad.
I
So so
could not
bad.
get through that book.
if only
I
Jess was
mean,
here. She hated that book.
oh really?
Hated it. Yeah, she I mean, I don't want to speak for her. She has a video where she talks about it, and you would probably enjoy it, Ingrid, because I'm sure she voices a
Yeah,
lot of things, but just how everybody is really dumb, and
yeah,
that
for
there's
sure.
a ton of, well, yeah. Jess's video, for anybody who's watching this and wants to see somebody rant about that, can watch her video.
Well,
It's
I just think that it's like, it's supposed to be a slasher and it's supposed to be fun. And like the concept is really fun. All these like final girls, like after all the trauma, and they like are dealing with trauma still, but it's just so bad. The main character is awful. Like, I don't know. I hated everything about that book.
I just remember vividly Jess talking about how there's a part where they just like leave some lady's body in the middle of some area
Yes.
or something.
Yes.
Um, and that they're like, it'll be fine. And then they just keep on going. And you're like, I don't know. I
I
mean, I haven't
just
read the book. So,
I just think it was like is almost like a caricature of what someone dealing with trauma would be like the way that the main character is and how she's like her only friend is a plant and like
oh,
I
yeah.
don't know it just I don't know I hated that part of it I hated it
It's
I
almost like
you
it was somewhat satirical, but it sort of it didn't hit the mark. It missed it. Is
correct yes I missed the mark for sure.
it's funny. I just watched the My Best Friend's Exorcism, the movie adaptation,
Oh
and
really?
it was fine.
oh, we went then.
I just think the ending was weird. It was weird. I guess it's not. the same ending as in the book. But
I actually do have that book. I haven't read it though. Yeah. Now I'm scared of like his books because like the only one I've actually liked so far is this one, is the Southern Book Club's Guide. And I tried the Final Girl Sport Group. I hated that. And then I think I've also tried a horror store, and I couldn't get into it either.
How many does he have?
He
like
does have,
5?
yeah, something
5?
like that.
I think so, yeah, because there's a Our Soul to Keep or something.
Right.
That's
It's
another
about
one.
a rock band. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why I shouldn't be in this video. I don't know anything about. I'm here more like the viewer who wants the spooky book recommendations or to hear more about spooky books, because I occasionally will read fantasy that has spooky moments, but I rarely read anything that's because I'm scared all the time. I'm like, it sounds creepy. So I think I'm kind of nervous to take the plunge. But this is not spooky. It's not. But there are elements to it. I'm gonna mention it as one that I think at this point is maybe overhyped, even though I know it's very loved and respected. So the book Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which is sci-fi, the idea is that he has all these different characters and he writes all of them in a different style, meaning almost like different genres for each character. And so some of it feels like it's inspired by horror stories. That's why I wanted to mention it. And I mean, I don't love that book. I think that the concept is cool, and I think it is difficult to write a book where you're embodying the different tropes and writing styles of different genres. I think that takes a lot of skill and understanding of the other genres, but I did not like that book at all. I think the writing itself, the crafting of sentences and things like that is very good. And obviously it sounds very basic to say, but the vocabulary and things like that are good. But as far as a story goes, and I know it continues on, but I just did not. I liked, I'm forgetting how many stories are in it, but there were 2 that I liked. There's one that I think does do horror elements in it, and that one I thought was one of the better ones. But I don't read a ton of horror, so it's hard to kind of compare. If it was an entire book, I wouldn't like it. That section worked for me because it was a shorter amount. But if it had been the whole book like that, I would have been like, this is just strange. Are there other ones, since you 2 are more versed?
I mean, I agree with Ingrid. I do think that a lot of Grady Hendrix books are overhyped because, like, I personally haven't read, well, I did read like a short story by him. It was in some collection, but like I haven't read really anything by him, like a full thing, but I always hear like some of the themes that he explores aren't done super well, but people really do like the Southern Book Club's
Book
Guide?
Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I know it's a mouthful.
I've heard that one does like explore themes well, but even just watching my best friend's exorcism, like the way the parents react to the teenagers, I was so frustrated.
Yeah.
It was not a good time. I don't know. I've only started exploring horror in the last like 3 years. And so I've noticed that for me, I don't like slashers. So I think that anything that's a slasher is never going to work for me. So I kind of ignore those types of recommendations.
I don't know. Like, I agree with you. Like, and the thing is, I love slasher movies. Have you guys watched the Fear Street trilogy on Netflix?
Not yet.
Oh, it's so good. I told Joshana doesn't like horror either. I told her to watch it and she loved it. It's like, it is kind of a slashery thing, but it's like 3 movies that take place in different years and they kind of all tie in together. It used to be based on like a, I think it's middle grade fiction like book that came out in the 80s. But basically it's like a slasher, but it's so good. It just has like all the campy slasher stuff, but it's not terrible. And so I know, because some of them are really bad, but I do love slasher. And the thing is, like, all the slasher books I've tried to read, I don't like. Like, the only one I'm still gonna, I think there's one by Stephen Graham Jones that I wanted to try. I think it's called The Final Girl or something like that.
Oh, My Heart is a Chainsaw.
Yes,
Oh
that one.
no, there is
There's
it my heart
another
goes
one.
Chainsaw? There is a Final Girls book. It's
There
like a
is one.
novella, right?
Yeah. And I heard it's good, but then again, I heard all these other books I tried is good too. Like there's one by what's that thriller author that nobody likes anymore?
The Kill Creek
Right.
person.
No, Riley Sager. Not that nobody likes it. So his books get progressively worse as they come out.
That's true. I read House Across the Lake, and that was
Yeah. Uh, I did like the second and third one, but anyway, the first one, which is about final girls, I also didn't like. So it's I don't know. I don't know why. I like it. I don't get on well with it. So
yeah.
it's funny that it's the same thing for you.
I
But I
think
do
that
like slashers.
there's some appeal in seeing characters where you're like, come on, get out, you can do
Mhm.
it. Like there's you get kind of worked up in a way, but I think it's hard. I mean, books are great at creating emotions by having you feel like you are with those characters and you're experiencing things with them. But then that momentum, it helps when you have the sound effects and when you can see there's like a sense of urgency that I think movies and shows do really well with that kind of stuff. Because growing up, I used to like scary movies and slashers growing up, and then and feel free to laugh at me because I don't actually think they're that scary to most people, but I saw all the Paranormal Activity movies in the same day. I think it was the first 3. I watched the first 2 because someone's like, we should go see the third one. I was like, I've never seen them. They're like, well, we'll have a marathon. We'll watch the first 2 and then we'll go see the third one. I was like, okay. And I was never fazed by those. And so I saw the first 2 and then we went and saw the third one. And that night I was like, I can't sleep. Like every little stupid noise or like our dog, if the dog moved, then I was like, what is the dog sensing right now? Like, and it's not rational. But so I used to really like that kind of stuff. And I just think that movies, I mean, I don't know. There's some books though. I think books are good at creating atmosphere and creeping you out through just like little tiny details here and there. But I don't know. Maybe that's why slashers don't work as well for you, maybe as books, because that sense of urgency and the sound effects and things like that are just. Plus, I mean, the gore aspect, right? Is you see it more on a movie than in your own imagination, maybe.
Well, I'm one of those people that's a baby. I can't watch horror really unless it's like psychological stuff because I have this weird thing. I don't know if there's a name for it, but basically when I see anything on screen that like is somebody getting, hacked up, I like feel it and I get really sick to my stomach and like I can't watch it. So I think with books, it's easy to make my brain not picture that thing. So it's easy to digest horror for me in that way. But I found that I typically like horrors that also deal with real world themes. So like I think that's a pretty like all of the horror recommendations I have, I always feel like it's dealing with some sort of struggle on top of this horrific thing. And the thing I like the most about it is like the eeriness and the way it makes you feel uncomfortable.
You know what's funny for me? Like I can watch any scary movie, the soundtrack and the sound is what gets me. So like I will literally be sitting there and I cover my ears and I can watch like literally anything can happen on the screen and it like doesn't faze me. It's when like the movie like the soundtrack will like do the sounds to like scare you and it makes you jump out of your like skin. But I can watch and like doesn't bother me. But like books, so the only thing that actually scares me is like supernatural stuff like possessions, stuff like that will actually scare me, but not like killer stuff. Like to me that doesn't bother me at all. So I can read whatever.
I think there's something about the helplessness in those sorts of stories because with killer ones, it's like obviously that's more of a threat in your own life, but you can imagine like you can fight back. But with something like with possession where you have no control or somebody else and you can't break them out of it, I feel like it's that feeling of helplessness that is scary. I don't know. I don't even like anytime you're given like when I was a kid, I had to have a tooth pulled because seems like a tangent. I promise it's going somewhere. I had to have a tooth pulled because I had a baby tooth that actually had a root that was like wrapped around the next tooth that was growing in. And so like I couldn't get it out and they couldn't see it when they did x-rays. And so when they went to pull my tooth, they were having the hardest time getting it out. But you know, they give you, what is it called? Laughing gas?
No.
Oh,
And I hate the idea of saying something stupid. So the whole time I'm just sitting there like, just don't say anything dumb. Don't say anything dumb. But like and when I had to have my appendix taken out, I apparently when I finally came to, I told the nurse, I was like, I'm really sorry if I said anything weird when I came, you know, out like at any point when I first started waking up. And she's like, the only thing you said was, I'm sorry if I say anything weird. Like I'd already said sorry. So just that feeling of like not being able to control myself. I think that's why like I have such a fear of being drunk. Like I don't want to drink or anything because I'm like, I'm going to say something very regrettable or I'm going to do something. So for me, that feeling of reading something where a character, they can't do anything is scarier than something they can try to fight back against, even though being stabbed by a person who's out of their mind is definitely more of a threat. More of a realistic threat.
Yeah. That's
funny.
What
are some spooky books that you think are worth the hype?
That are worth the hype. I think that The Only Good Indians for me is like, although I mean I see mixed reviews about it, a lot of that is because people go in with certain expectations regarding writing styles, and I think that oftentimes people go in with a Western mindset of writing styles, and so there's an interesting conversation that happens regarding The Only Good Indians in terms of the writing style, but that's for another time. So I do think it is hyped, but I do also see mixed reviews about it. I think I loved it. Like I gave it 5 stars and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It is one of the few horror books that I have read that has like pretty horrific imagery at times. But I think that it also explores a lot of contemporary Indigenous themes that make it really well-rounded, and those moments don't feel gratuitous. They feel like they're an important aspect of exploring these themes that he was trying to explore in this book. So like I said, going back to like the types of things that I love, it's when you're exploring these different like heavy themes and you add it in a horror, you add in horror, and I feel like that makes it really like, it does something to me.
That makes sense. I've wanted to read that one.
Yeah.
And I'll keep in mind too that the style is maybe a little bit different. Do you have some, Ingrid?
Yeah, I do. So A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. I know Paul Tremblay is kind of overhyped in horror, but I thought that book was very good. It's about like 2 sisters. One of them is like older, and you get the point of view is from the younger sister when her sister starts acting like she's possessed, right? So the whole book you like don't know if she's actually possessed or if she is like kind of either like mentally ill or if she's putting on a show, because when all this stuff starts to happen, her family decides to call in a film crew and they film like this girl's life. They make it like a reality TV of like, oh, this girl is possessed, let's put it on TV kind of thing. But the whole book is from the sister's point of view, and she's young at the time. She's like 8. And so like it's a whole lot of like, it's very spooky. It's a very good spooky book, but you don't know if it's like the family's putting on a show, if the girl's actually possessed, or if, you know what I mean? Like it's
is it just kind of everything that you just described, that's what you get, or would you say there's commentary about the way that we almost like
for sure it's about the commentary, yes, of like, and I've noticed that I've read a lot of books about this, like of like TV portrayal of like how obsessed we are with like, you know, either like TV or social media or like putting weird things in TV and people still watch it, like that whole Dahmer thing that's going on now, and like the show.
What did you say this book is called again?
A Head Full of Ghosts
Okay.
by Paul Tremblay. But it's very, very good. And the fact that it's like an unreliable narrator, I kind of like that too when it comes to horror, because it's not that she's unreliable as a person, it's because she was 8 and like she's remembering all these things as an adult, and it happened when she was a child, you know?
You might also like Paul Tremblay's other book, The Cabin at the End of the World.
I read that, and I also like.
Okay.
Yes, I liked it. I didn't like the ending.
Okay.
So the ending I didn't love, but I can also appreciate kind of like the ride. You know what I mean? Like just because I didn't like the ending doesn't mean that I didn't like the book as a whole. Yeah. But yeah, it was good.
I found that that's kind of the case with a lot of any kind of spooky or thriller. It's the way you feel during the ending. Because I found that I've said many times that the book Small Favors, the ending, because the ending's kind of like you getting answers, and that for me always takes some of the scariness out of it once there's explanation to things. So I'm like, well, whatever. I mean, I guess that's why I know we talked about it in the fall read stuff, but House of Salt and Sorrows, what I liked about that one is you do get explanation, but then right after you start to second guess the explanation you just got. You're like, is that what's happening? And I actually really liked that about that one. Small Favors is less like that. Oh my gosh, what Moves the Dead? We also mentioned that one the other day, but that's one where the whole book is kind of the search for the answer in some way. So I actually never found the book that scary, but there are some elements to it, like just some of the imagery. There's a part where a woman's mouth is just open and the way she's kind of smiling but kind of yelling, but there's no sound. You're just like, ugh. And it's just the middle of the night and she's in her like nightgown. So the way it's set up is very good. I think for one that I think is worth the hype, and I've praised this story before, I need to finish because I've seen all of the anime for it, and there is a manga that dives into it a lot more. But the first season of The Promised Neverland.
Oh my God.
So good.
Okay, I did not know that was a horror manga series. So I like picked it up on a whim, hadn't heard anything about it, and I was like, oh, this looks so cute. Because sometimes I like, fluffy stuff.
Yeah.
So I picked it up from the library thinking like, oh, I'm gonna have this good time, this fluffy. And then it turned into a horror real quick. And I was like, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, how did we get here?
I know. So did you ever finish, or did you only?
I'm 4 volumes in.
Okay. I am planning. Now I kind of want to like message you as I read through the manga, because the anime is only 2 seasons, and basically everybody I've seen who's read all of the manga is upset that they left so much out. As somebody who hadn't read the manga first, I was like, okay, the second season's not really scary the same way the first season is, but I thought it was like a fine conclusion, but it felt like a lot of time was passing and that we were skipping stuff. But everybody's like, no, you don't understand the amount that we skip. It's so much better in the manga. So I'm excited to jump into the manga. But the show, so we were talking about earlier the difference between spooky things in writing versus on screen. Oh, the show, especially for an anime, the way they utilize camera angles and sound effects you would expect, but you don't think camera angles when you think anime as being a big deal. But the way that they'll like turn around a corner, or the way they go down a hallway and stuff is done so well. And I remember my husband and I were like, let's start The Promised Neverland. And then we watched the entire first season in a night. It was so good. And we're like, this was perfect. That first season is perfect. And I stand by that because it's true. It's so good. And it's genuinely like, you're so scared if anybody doesn't know what The Promised Neverland is, it's all these kids who are in an orphanage, and they're all really excited for someday when they have a chance to be adopted and to be a part of a family. And then a few of them see what happens to one of the children who is adopted, and then it takes off from there. So it's funny because like if you didn't know, like you didn't, when you first jump into it, it is kind of cute and silly for a while. And then all of a sudden you get to like a horrifying part. You're like, whoa, what the heck? And then And then you feel so much for these kids because you're like, oh no. Anyway, it's great. And I highly recommend the first season at the very least of the anime. I'm not sure how many volumes it takes to get to the end of the first season, but Steph,
Yeah,
you should
I
watch.
don't know. I've always been told to like not watch the anime because I've already started the manga series. So people say that you'll be really disappointed by it. But now I'm really curious to watch it. But there's like 13 volumes. So if they did that in 2 seasons, that's probably a lot of volumes in one season.
I'm thinking chapters. I think chapter wise, the first season is like 30 something chapters, but I don't want to tell you complete. I think I looked it up and it was like 37 because I wanted to at least read through that part. But yeah, the first season is worth, I think, watching. But after that, I can totally see what people are saying about how there's clearly things left out, and it loses its horror feel in the second season. It becomes more like fantasy,
Oh,
which
it's
is
kind of that's kind of how I feel about like Death Note is also a really spooky series, and I think that I got halfway through the series and then it just started to become really repetitive, and I stopped reading it. But like if you want something that's also kind of spooky and hyped, Death Note is very hyped and it is fun, but it does, for me, it got to a point where it was just a little too repetitive.
my Sean would completely agree because he liked it at first, and then he said it just kind of goes a lot. I've seen a lot of people feel that way, that they really like the beginning and then nobody really loves how it ends up.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I guess, deliver the way they would hope. But
Yeah.
that's one that I guess kind of overhyped, kind of hyped. It's a mix.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about underhyped spooky Rex. So just anything that you think is amazing but that nobody seems to talk about, or maybe nobody really talks about on BookTube, but it's popular outside of BookTube. Just basically something you like.
I have a stack because I feel like no one talks about these ones, but these authors are not necessarily not known. So I have The Changeling by Victor Laval. This is like, actually, Elle, I think you would really like this because you like T. Kingfisher, and T. Kingfisher, people classify her horror as like folk horror. And this is what this is. Like, it obviously it says The Changeling, so it is about a changeling, which is like folk tale stuff. And it's really cool because it's set in New York and you really get the vibe of New York. Like New York is almost a character in and of itself, just the way that this is written. But our main character, his wife keeps telling him that she thinks the baby is not their baby. And so, changeling, that's what that's about. So she disappears and he's like, I have no idea what's going on and I need to figure this out. So he goes on this wild adventure through New York to try to figure it out. And it's not as horrific as other books that I think fall into the horror genre, but like there is a lot of interesting exploration of like being a Black man in America and about police brutality, and then just like exploring New York in and of itself and the things that have happened in New York and New York's history, but also there's this like underlying fairy tale horror aspect to it. And I just really loved it. I read it like 5 years ago when it came out, and it still has stuck with me to this day. Like I vividly remember it. So that's like my number one, but my second one that if I had to pick out of this stack would be The Good House by Tananarive.
I'm reading that now.
Do you like it?
I'm loving it, but it is scary. I'm reading it in like spurts. Like I can't read it at night because it's too scary.
So
but
one
I'm
of my
reading
other
it now.
things that I really love in horror, which I can usually watch on television as well, is like haunted house ghost stories. I think that just comes from like my love of like Casper. Okay, yeah, it comes from like my love of Casper and like the Haunted Mansion and all of those like Disney movies that had like ghosts and haunted house. But this one is like really creepy, and it's like a generational curse that's on this family in this house. And like while it's 500 pages, I think it's like 500 pages well spent, and you're on the edge of your seat. I mean, Ingrid, you could probably speak to this.
Yeah. No, it's true.
The whole time.
Yeah. It hooks you right from the beginning too.
So the Changeling, it's funny that you brought that one up because I think I mentioned this in the last video we recorded for fall reads, but my husband and I are going to a cabin at the end of the month, and we were like trying to figure out books to take. Yeah, I did mention it because I
Oh no.
What
X,
happened?
X and Kiss Curse, but I was asking Sean like, oh, are there any that you feel like will fit the like spooky season? And he mentioned, he's like, I think I'll bring the Changeling. I'm pretty sure that one's kind of creepy. So maybe I'll buddy read it with him, and then I'll report back. There's a book. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I hope you really like it because you like T. Kingfisher, and I feel like they're different. Like he does add humor to his writing as well, but he explores a lot of the serious topics. But just like the fact that you tend to like her folk horror, I think that's why you like it.
There's a Changelings, but I feel like I can't mention it because that's kind of a reveal. So, I mean, unless people know, but I feel like that's a hard part too with sometimes reading spooky books is if you describe it, you ruin it. Yeah. So there is a book that is categorized as YA and in the fantasy section, I think usually. And it was, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to reveal. I'm going to send in the private chat and you tell me if you think, hopefully it doesn't ruin it for you two. I can't remember if you've read this. Hold on. You can tell me if I should not mention. Sent it in the private chat and then there it is.
Oh, that's funny. I DNF'd this.
Okay. Well, it has that like, did you know that that's in that then?
I kind of figured. But okay, no.
I won't say.
Okay.
Because it is kind of a reveal later.
Oh, okay.
I kind of had mixed feelings about it, but I think about that book. I think is why I still recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
But now I feel like I can't say it right now.
No.
Ingrid, do you have underhyped spooky Rex?
I do. So Winter People by Jennifer McMahon is really, really good. It's also a haunted house kind of thing. And it has like dual timelines, but basically in like 1908, and it's set in Vermont. So it has like that spooky, wintry feel in the middle of nowhere. It's like a farmhouse that in 1908, like the person that lived there was found dead outside the house. And then like present time, a family lives there. And I think they find the person's diary or something, and they start reading their diary and some stuff happens, and you kind of go back and forth in between timelines. But I thought it was a really good, like spooky house kind of book. And like, I didn't see the reveal coming at all. I was like so far out of my reach that I was like, okay, this is good.
Is it something you feel like you could have figured out? Like once you got the answer, then it made sense the rest of it? Or do you feel like it was impossible?
It makes, so like with everything happening in the book, like after you find out, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But like, I think it's something that you just don't see coming. So you don't realize like that it's an option kind of thing. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know it's not a spooky book, but I think people might not realize when they go into it that the first book in this series has, I think, horror elements, and that's the Bone Shard Daughter.
Oh,
because it's got like the girl has some of her memories missing, and she's trying to explore. Because she's the emperor's daughter, so she's trying to explore all of these different rooms and places in this, large building that they live in. And there's these weird servant creatures, and some of them are like spider-like, and one of them is very spider-like. And so some of the moments in that you're like, oh, this is scary. I know it's not actually, but if somebody hasn't read that one, and they like fantasy that has a little bit of the horror elements sprinkled in, that first book definitely. And there's some questions that come up about, I mean, I don't want to say too much either about that one, but I just love, that's probably not fitting, but I just wanted to mention it.
No, that's true. I forgot about, like, I didn't forget about the book, but I forget that there is like those horrific elements in it. Because when I think of spooky, like fantasy doesn't come into my brain, but there are so many fantasies that have like horrific imagery and elements in them that feel like horror, because I don't know. I haven't read it yet. I'm probably going to read it next month. Is it Ashes to the Sun, the Django Wexler book?
Oh, yeah, I haven't read it either, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've heard that there's like some horrific monsters in there that people like say if you are a fantasy reader, but you want something that's kind of horror-y for the season, they recommend that.
Oh, I did not realize that one had that.
Yeah.
So now I know for that one. I mean, you there was one you were mentioning earlier, the house one. You just talked about it.
Oh, The Good House.
The Good House.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's scary, but this idea of there being this curse, this generational curse, is basically like the inheritance of Orquídea Divina. Has kind of that same feel, except for that one's not really frightening.
Yeah.
It's like scary light, curse lights, where you can definitely handle it and you're not going to probably be creeped out as you are trying to sleep at night. So I know in the fall reads one, we talked about dark academia, and that can lean into horror for sure. I know when we talked about it, we talked about Ninth House being one that was maybe a little overhyped at this point with the amount that Ninth House gets recommended on fall lists. And I didn't actually love Ninth House, but it is dark academia that leans very creepy and disturbing, I think. It's not like, ooh, atmosphere in school, kind of a dark academia. It embraces the dark side, I think.
Yeah, I actually have 2 dark academia. Well, they're considered dark academia, but like there's a whole conversation about what dark academia means versus what my brain categorizes dark academia as. So if you were to look at the list, Summer Suns and Plain Bad Heroines, they're both technically dark academia. And they're both gothic horror. Plain Bad Heroines, I hesitate to recommend to everybody because it's written in such an interesting way. Like the only way I could describe it is, how in A Series of Unfortunate Events you have Lemony Snicket speaking to you, the reader. In here, there's an unnamed narrator similarly speaking to you as the reader. And by the end, you probably have some theories about who is telling the story. But it's basically, there's this book by an author, and in like the 1800s, this group of girls at a boarding school get really obsessed with it. And then the 2 girls end up dying by what could potentially be a tragic accident, but there's some like implications that maybe it wasn't. And then you fast forward into current time, and there is an author who wrote a story about this situation, and it's being made into a film. So you're following the author and 2 of the actresses that are going to be playing these characters, and weird things start happening to them. But you go back and forth between the 2 timelines, like as the story is unfolding towards this tragic accident, but also them playing these characters and what's like happening to them. But so I don't always recommend it because I think that if you're like a fan of, I don't know, The Starless Sea, where it's a story within a story, then you'll probably like it. But I think the thing that got me is that it's like just completely queer. Every character in here is queer, and there's like a polyamorous relationship, and it's exploring themes of sexuality as well, but it's also kind of horror, but it's gothic horror. So I don't know.
Some of what you were describing, I haven't read this, but Sean has read House of Leaves.
Mm-hmm.
It's that like this happened and now they're making a thing about this thing, but then is this even really, and sort of that confusion about what's real and what's not. Is that one, I don't think that one's nearly as popular as House of Leaves, right? Or am I, would you say if somebody likes House of Leaves, they might like that one? Or
I'm not sure. I haven't read House of Leaves. I mean, from what I hear about House of Leaves, there's like a level of pretentiousness to it that I think is very comparable to this book. And I definitely think that if you like that confusing, you need to figure things out, there's like some open-endedness to it, and there's like a level of you just sort of being along for the ride. It's probably comparable. Yeah.
I have that book too. I haven't read it though, but I do own it. I do have one that I read and I liked. I will say that I don't think dark academia is really my thing. Like, I find it very pretentious, like the whole school thing. Like, um, I DNF ninth house. I hated it, like, with all my being.
I didn't care for it either.
Yeah. But I did read A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee, and if I'm not mistaken, it's considered YA, but I thought
That's right.
it does have a lot of dark themes. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know. But it's set in a school, like the Dalloway school, and these girls live in this house, which is I think it's called the Goodwin House, and 5 girls, like back in the day, died, and people blame witchcraft and stuff like that. So the house has like a weird like spookiness to it or whatever. And then this girl comes back to the school, and you don't really know like what happened to her, like that she had to leave and now she's back. And she's kind of an unreliable narrator, but she meets another girl that's in the dormitory with her now, and she is a writer and stuff like that. And they kind of get like thrown in together to this thing, and it's the ending and stuff is very unexpected, but it's a very good dark academia. I thought it wasn't super bad like the other ones I've tried.
I do think that you're right about there being a pretentious factor, especially when it's an Ivy League school. And I mean,
I don't know what it is. Like, I do find, and that's another thing, like I find the concept fun, but
Yeah.
like the ones I've tried don't execute it very well.
you mentioned witches. I didn't find this book all that scary. I liked it, and then I hated the end. There's like this little part tagged on at the end that I didn't like. But an atmospheric book that I read years ago was The Wicked Deep. And
I read that.
really enjoyed like a lot of the story. It's easy to get into. It's not like that. It's not that scary. It's not I would say like really deep themes or anything, but it's like a fun, spooky read where every year these there's this period of time where it's believed that these women who were killed years ago for being witches, that to get their vengeance on this town, they like summon men out to the sea, and then you always end up having men drown as a result. And it's become this kind of small town tradition because they don't really think it's real, and they think it's just kind of in people's heads or whatever. So it's like this thing where they all like go out to the beach right around that time, and they've embraced it, which I'm like, that's a human being thing to do. I just feel like that's exactly what people would do in that situation. But the girl you're following, this person that I think she has kind of a crush on this guy or something. Again, it's been quite a while, or she was dating or getting to know or something. It seems to be one of the people that's being called, and then so she's trying to figure out, is this real? What's going on? And so I liked a lot of the book, and then, like I said, the very, very, very end, I was like, I mean, why though? So I just feel like if I hadn't read those last couple pages, I would have actually really liked the book overall. But obviously those last couple pages aren't going to ruin it for a lot of other people, and they would probably have fun with it. And if you're a wimp like me, this is probably a good one to try out. I have, I don't know if there are other ones, any specifics for some of the other categories, but I'll go through them. So like any kind of retelling. I know earlier you were talking about the Steph, the kind of folklore one with the chain. So even if it's not a retelling, just fairy tale or folklore feeling. I have mystery thriller. We talked a little bit about haunted and dark academia, and then I just mentioned an atmospheric one. But if there's others that you feel like fall into those categories, you can just go for it.
So I want to mention two because they.
Go ahead, Steph.
Okay, there's two that I like to mention in tandem, and so one of them is, I guess, considered more of a like psychological thriller, and one of them is considered more horror, but I don't know, they do the same thing. Anyways, it's The Push and Just Like Mother. So if you like things that deal with motherhood, I guess like read these. But The Push really messed me up because it is about a mom who she ends up having a baby because her husband really wants children. She has the baby. She does not connect with her, and as a matter of fact, she thinks that something is wrong with her child, like that she exhibits behaviors that are concerning. And then she thinks to fix the problem, she should have another baby. So she does, and things get worse. So I just remember that this one, like, I couldn't stop reading it, and then the ending, I was like, sorry, what? It was a really good ending. It's spoiler alert, it's like one of my favorite books of the year. And then just like Mother, the reason I kind of recommend them in tandem is because this also explores themes of motherhood, but this one is a cult. So our main character was born into a cult, and then later on she gets taken out of that cult as like, I think she's like 7 or 8, but she had a really close relationship with her cousin, but you don't know if they're actually blood related just because of how the cult works. So she spends a majority of her life trying to reconnect with that cousin, and then eventually she finds her, and things spiral out of control when they start to develop a relationship together. And the thing about both of these is they kind of keep you on the edge of your seat in a way that's like uncomfortable, but it's not like this horrific imagery or anything. It's more like these are real life things that could potentially happen to you. And that's, I think, oftentimes scarier for me than like slasher things. I just don't like the imagery of it. But yeah, there's not like a lot of like horrific imagery in these. It's just like these real life things that are happening to these women, and it's, yeah, it was a lot. But I liked both of them.
You mentioning it being the one having kind of a cult. I don't even know exactly how to categorize this book, but Sorrowland is one that I think, do you have it on there?
Yeah.
I didn't love Sorrowland, but I do think that it's one where even though I didn't love it, it's still something I think worth picking up because it is such an experience, and there's so many things to it. There's obviously a lot of commentary. I actually felt like for the amount of different things we touch on, the reason it didn't end up working for me is I wish we could have had more time for a lot of those things because it was so many things that I was like, I mean, I actually think you could have pulled this into more books, or maybe not a series, but had a focus more in Sorrowland, and then a focus, not that you of course can't touch on multiple things, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper with some of them. But there's definitely aspects of cult in there. There's aspects of how society has mistreated certain groups of people, and like government experimentation and who is picked for that. And so there's a lot of those themes. And then the, I guess, magic of the book is also very disturbing and frightening and strange and bizarre. And there's some, it's not the slasher kind of scary, but just there's moments to do with like seeing individuals who have died and things like that I think is pretty disturbing. So it's an experience again of a book.
So when you said atmospheric, I thought of Mexican Gothic, which I didn't love personally because I don't know. I didn't think that it was a horror book. Like I think it's much more of like a thriller-ish. Like because when I think horror, I think like scary, right? It should bring out some sort of like, even when stuff is talking about the fact that nothing horrific happens, it makes you feel uncomfortable. But I do think that maybe this one is a good one for people that are kind of like wimps, as you put it, and you kind of want to get into like horror. It's a very good like atmospheric book. Like the descriptions and stuff is really good, and like a thriller that I know, Steph, you said you don't love his writing, but Misery by Stephen King is like, in my opinion, I read it, I thought it was very good. Like it's one of those books that you're on the edge of your seat the entire book, but not in a good way, because you're just so like, oh my God, I want to know, like this person needs to get away from this crazy, you know what I mean? Like, but it's very, very good. I read that like years ago.
With what? Mexican Gothic, because I'm wanting to read that one hopefully soon. And Steph, your expression, did you not think it was maybe as good as a lot of other people?
No, I mean, it's interesting because Mexican Gothic was like the second horror book, like true horror book that I'd read. And I think it's categorized as horror because it's
gothic,
like a gothic
horror or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is very slow, and I see what you're saying about like not feeling that it's horror. Silver Maroon Garcia is like one of those people that like I absolutely want to love because I've read like 5 things by her. Um, she just like adds in things like a romance that just feels so out of place for me, and I'm like, why does this exist? And it really throws me out of the story. But she does do a very good job at atmosphere, like Ingrid said, like her ability to write in a historical setting and bring in an atmosphere that feels really accurate to that time is impressive.
Do you think that the romance aspect gives it more mass appeal in a sense?
Maybe, I mean,
or maybe pulls in people that wouldn't. I guess when I say mass appeal, I mean people that might not pick up, a gothic horror otherwise. There's almost this, the way the book is presented, it almost seems like there's this disturbing glamour to the story that I think can be appealing to people who wouldn't otherwise be all that interested.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. Because I know that her other books, like that she's written before Mexican Gothic, have, like, she wrote a fantasy romance. That's what the Gods of Jade and Shadow. It's a fantasy.
I read that one too.
Yeah, and I haven't read. I'm gonna be reading Certain Dark Things probably this week, so I'm interested because that's a vampire novel.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see, like, in her older works if she's focused on romance, because even I read the Island of Dr. Moreau. It's just a romance as well. And so I was really disappointed because I had different expectations going in, so it's probably my fault. But yeah, maybe it's because it is more appealing for somebody who isn't like a traditional horror reader.
Yeah. I guess, see, you made me think of that because I also, like, I put this in atmospheric, but it's a book that I didn't love. Like, I didn't think it hit the mark for me, but like I couldn't pinpoint why. And that kind of makes sense because, like, for me, like, romance has no place in a horror book, right? So then maybe that's why, because I felt like the book had such potential and it like falls so flat. Like, I don't know. I didn't think it was
the Dr. Moreau one. Is that what it's called?
No, the Mexican Gothic one.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And then also Gods of Jade and Shadow, same thing. Like, premise is great. Like, I thought it would be like a really, really good fantasy, and it just kind of falls a little bit flat at the end for me. And I want to read the vampire one because I love anything to do with vampires, but I also think, like, I do want to try another one of her books, because if I read something else and I'm like, okay, it didn't work, then I'm just going to give up, because I feel like it's just the writing or, the way that she executes the story doesn't work for me. But yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that. It could be because I'm like, how can this be labeled horror?
That actually is an interesting point. And I'll say first if there's any other things you want to quickly recommend, but then I think it'd be kind of fun to end on how expectations or your personal level of what you find frightening or those sorts of things, how they impact the genre as a whole. So first, are there any other books you want to recommend really quick?
I have maybe 3, I guess. If you like Stephen Graham Jones, you should read Mapping the Interior. I loved that one. I think atmospheric-wise, The Year of the Witching has a great atmosphere. I didn't fully love the ending, so it was like a 4-star read for me, but I still like the atmosphere was amazing. And then I just finished, like, yesterday, Jackal, and it just came out. And it's like a thriller mystery, but it also has horrific elements. And someone mentioned, maybe it was Elle mentioned earlier, that sometimes when you get the reveal of a horror book, some of the rest of the book loses its charm. I was afraid that would happen in Jackal, but when you get the ending, it almost makes it a little more horrific for me as a reader. So I recommend it. It just came out, and it actually isn't even being shelved in like horror. It was just in the regular fiction section when I went to grab a copy, but I really liked it.
I'm going to put that in as well. That's why I keep looking down, because I'm putting things in. That sounds so. What is?
I'm going to say, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say,
Go
what is
ahead.
that one about? Or is it one of those it's better to not know kind of books?
Oh, so Jackal, basically you have a main character who she lived in this like Appalachian town, and it was very small. Everybody knew everyone, and she was one of like two Black children in that town. So then she moves away to New York to kind of like start her life and to get away from a lot of the racism and bigotry. And she like but there's a lot of like darkness and weirdness that follows her, she feels like, through her life. So she ends up going back to the town to go to her best friend's wedding, and during the wedding her best friend's daughter ends up going missing, and she notices that every summer around a certain time, one of the Black girls in this town end up going missing, and they get found with their hearts taken out. So she is like, especially because it's so close to home for her, she's like, I need to figure out what is happening. And so you go on this journey with her to find out why this keeps happening in this town.
That sounds disturbing.
Yeah.
What's the author's name?
Let me double check. I think she's a debut author.
Erin E. Adams?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I definitely want to look into that now because that sounds really good. Anyway, sorry, Ingrid, you were going to mention one.
Oh, I know we talked about this on another live show recently, but I was going to mention Sundial just for the fact that it's just, I don't know, it's so good, but I can't explain why because I don't want to spoil anything. Mm-hmm. But I just will say that it's like a mother-daughter relationship where the daughter is exhibiting some weird behavior, and the mom's like, okay, I have to bring her back to the house that I used to live in, that it's in the Mojave Desert, and it does have a lot of atmosphere too, if you like that. And you just don't expect the ending. And like, even when you start to find out what happened, you're like, what in the heck? It's one of those books that I read it and I'm like, at the end, after I read it, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I still think about it to this day. And I read it like in the beginning of the year. It's very good. It's by Catriona Ward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked Sundial.
You did? Yeah, it was good.
With that, what are things that you think, what are your expectations when you go in? What's something that makes or breaks horror or thriller or those kinds of spookier reads? Because I know we mentioned it a couple of times now. I haven't read that much, but when I do read it, it's like the experience of it all is more important usually, but that's because I haven't read a lot. So I think there are some instances where the end sort of informs your opinion about the rest of it. And then also, like you were saying, Ingrid, maybe some books you're not sure how you feel initially, but they sit with you for so long that you're like, okay, there's a reason this is lingering here. So what is it that you think makes or breaks a spooky book for you? And then what is something like your expectations going in and how that impacts if you like it?
I think it's okay. So there's a couple things, like, because I really love haunted house stories and like ghost stories, I hate the trope when it's a whole haunted house situation and then in the end there's some like reasonable explanation for it. Just give me the ghosts.
Please.
Because with that, like, it makes it less impactful for me as a reader. I'm sure some people like that idea that like real life things are scarier, but I think we mentioned it earlier, when there's like paranormal stuff, it feels almost like it's more helpless when it's not easily explained away. So I hate that trope so much. And then I think when an ending is really cheesy and it doesn't fit the vibe of the rest of the book, where you might have been on edge the whole time, or you think it's going to go this certain way, and then it ends in almost maybe a convenient way, or a way that doesn't like fully make sense to the rest of the plot. I find that a lot in horror, actually, because I've read quite a few like thriller and horrors through my time exploring the genre, and I find that I don't actually like a lot of what I read because of the ending. And so that frustrates me. And then when you add romance into them, I'm always like, why?
Yeah. For me, for a horror to be good, like I said, it has to be like scary, like in the sense of like you're on the edge of your seat wanting to find out. So almost like there's a mystery, like with
Right.
the head full of ghosts, like you don't know, right? You're getting all these scary things going on, right? And like the descriptions are scary. You're like, oh, this girl's really really creepy, but like you don't really know if it's, I don't know, a mental breakdown. You don't know if she's faking it. You don't know if the girl was 8 and everything seems scarier when you're a child, right? Like it could be explained away that way. um but I do also like that. I used to hate when there was an open ending, like open ended. And horror does this a lot. Like Stephen King is known for doing this, and that's why people say that he can't finish a book, because like all his endings are almost like you're like, what the f, you know? Like, but I learned to like embrace that, because in a lot of books, like and I can't say it because then you'll know which book I'm talking about. But in one of the books that I didn't love, it was because of that. But at the same time, like I can get why that's how it ended, and I can appreciate it. Um, but yeah, like I think that for me, it's more mostly about how the book is mapped out. Like the ending doesn't do like doesn't affect me that much. Um, because I think Elle is right when you say that when things are explained away too much, you're kind of like, oh, okay, this is boring, right? Like it's like tied up in a neat bow, and you're kind of like,
Almost like
oh,
it's
well,
not scary anymore because
yeah, because you know
I
what
never needed to be
happened.
scared, I guess. Everything was fine the whole time.
Exactly. Um, yeah, and I want to tell you guys about a book that's like that, and it like kind of kills the magic, but then I don't want to say it because it's gonna spoil the book, so never mind. But um, but yeah, it would have been a really good book.
I think for
Anyway.
the limited amount I've read, that so far, what I can say is that I want an experience when I'm reading the book. But I'm also picky about when things get really strange. At some point, I'm like, I mean, this is just so bizarre. And then I kind of, I think, end up feeling less afraid because I'm like, I don't, what is even happening right now? There's like a certain line that is scary because you're unsure, but then you get to a certain point where it's just weird. And then I think that's when I stop being scared.
Mm-hmm.
Or when nobody else seems frightened. Like maybe the writing is really well done and it's scary, but then like the characters are fine with it. I think House of Hollow was an example. I've mentioned that one before, where I wish that the characters were a little more alarmed by what was happening, because that would have made, I think, the book scarier. But House of Hollow is one where weird things start happening and it takes place in our own world, and like really disturbing things are happening, and they seem like there's a need to do something about what's happening, but they don't seem all that, like one of the characters is literally like, weird things have always happened to us. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not scared then, if you just are like, it's fine. I mean, when have things ever been normal for us? So that sort of took out the scary factor a little bit. But and like I think, Steph, you're right that the ending, I don't mind if the ending sort of explains things and then maybe it's not as scary, but I still felt scared the whole time. But it's when it's like really 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 cheesy that you're like, I mean, all right. And then you mentioned Stephen King, where my husband, I can't remember is it called The Dome, I think, or something?
Oh yeah.
Where
This,
he was
yeah.
like, the ending made the whole thing. He's like, I wish he just hadn't tried to explain anything and just because it was almost a thought experiment. And so sometimes when you give explanation to thought experiments, it sort of like takes away from the thought experiment a little bit, or the themes that you're showing. I don't know. It's hard. I can't really pinpoint yet because I feel like I'm not well versed enough in what I do and don't love. I can just tell you when I don't love something and when I do right now. And I don't think I'm able to pinpoint really very well. But I feel like it's so hit or miss from person to person also, because the experience plays such a huge role. Not that it doesn't in other genres, but like if you read a fantasy story, there's tons of different things. But for them, I think a lot of people read fantasy and they like really like being in this different world. And you know, there's certain things that are pretty common in general. So I think with horror, it's like you go in to be scared. So if you're not scared at all and it's a romance or something, then it's like, what am I?
Yeah.
Maybe you otherwise would have liked it if it was like a romance that has a creepy feel or something. But then because you're told then your expectations are I should be scared. Why am I wondering about if these two people should be together or not?
It's funny.
Or yeah, go
on.
ahead. No, I was gonna say, or like if you're gonna include the romance, they really include the romance, and I think that was my other problem with Mexican Gothic was that it's kind of like, oh yeah, they're in love, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're gonna get married. I'm like, what just happened? Where did this come out of? Yeah. So yeah,
it was funny too that you mentioned open endings because I was just doing a video where I was talking about my favorite horror books that I've read since exploring horror. And one of the things I find that I do like is an open ending, but not like so open that you couldn't assert certain things about it. But I think that there are some horror books where the endings are open in a way that it feels open, but if you were to reread it, or if you were like to hash things in your minds about what happened, you figure it out. You know what I mean? So I think that sometimes I don't read a lot of Stephen King, so I can't speak to his open endings. But I do think sometimes open endings work really well for certain horror books because you can like revisit certain moments and be like, wait, maybe X, Y, and Z happened because of this. And then you just start making all these connections.
Do you, there was a movie that came out, I'm totally spacing on the name of it, with Robert De Niro, and there's a little girl who I think is it something Fanning?
Oh, Dakota Fanning?
Yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about? Hold on. Let me look it up really quick. Because it has a kind of sort of open ending where you're like, oh no, what's gonna hide and seek.
I think I watched that like a long time ago, but I don't remember how it ended.
Oh, it ends with a little girl drawing something.
Okay.
And how she draws it is like revealing to maybe things that she's experiencing too. I mean, I haven't seen it in so long, but that's one of those movies where the whole time you're just like, what the heck is happening? Like, you can't tell if there's something paranormal, if there isn't. I would be curious if I were to go back and watch it because it has some things to do with mental health. If I would think that it was done poorly or if I would like appreciate how it's done. So maybe it's actually not good. But it was one of those that I watched as a kid and I was just like, wow. And it was before scary movies scared me.
Oh, okay.
But it has like a kind of sort of open end where you don't know if now the people that are like, you know, left behind are also going to be impacted by what's happened. And then therefore maybe things will happen with them. Or maybe it's just like Ingrid was talking about the mind of a child and how. Did you ever see Gothica with Halle Berry?
Yeah.
No, did you like that or do you think it's terrible?
No, I remember watching it.
Sad.
Yeah, it is. I think I was a lot younger when I watched it, but I remember like when you said that I could picture the cover. Like she's like it's like a blue cover and like so cheesy.
Do you know anything about that movie?
I'll tell you right now, I don't watch a lot of TV or movies, so I'm terrible at
No, I don't watch very many movies either. These are all things I watched as a kid.
Oh, okay.
I watched scary things when I was a kid.
I should tell you the story that I when I was like 6 years old, my brother let me watch The Leprechaun, and it screwed me up for anything scary movie wise, even though it's so cheesy. And I look back on it and I'm like, it's so funny that that's the movie that ruined me for horror.
My husband and I, because neither of us aren't really like scary movie people, and we always joke, we're like, there should be some kind of law against previews for scary movies as ads before a YouTube video. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to be scared right now. Why are they showing me this?
I watched The Exorcist, like the first one when I was younger, and I remember like I remember being like, I'm gonna be fine, Mom. Like, just let me watch it. I'll be fine. I'll tell dude. I didn't sleep for like 2 weeks because I was so scared.
What's the is it Carrie, the original?
For the Stephen King, yeah.
The Stephen King one, yeah, where she, you know, people at school mistreat her and stuff. So I saw the original one of that, and then I think the original Poltergeist.
Oh, that one's kind of scary too.
Yeah. I watched so many scary movies as a kid, and then was always fine. Like I said, it was college. Paranormal Activity marathon that suddenly I was
Killed
like, you know
you?
what? This scares me. I don't like this.
Well, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't even know if this was my choice, but then I watched The Ring when I was 13.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Solidified.
that one was, yeah.
Yeah, it solidified the fact that I didn't want to watch scary things.
Yeah.
I will say
That
I do
one.
like parody movies though,
Mhm.
because I like when they make fun of all of that. And you're like, oh, that's right. It's not scary at all. Well, anyway, there's some spooky reads and some discussions about spooky reads and when things are scary and when they're not, and things that are overhyped and underhyped. This was so fun. I want to get more into this kind of stuff. I think it's just trying to dissect the different subgenres within just like any genre and figuring out what works for you.
Mhm.
So I'm excited because I feel like there's some recommendations that you two have mentioned that I'm really interested in. And hopefully the Changeling I can read soon. And then I'll tell you what I think, Steph. But were there any other things you wanted to mention before we wrap it up? No? Okay. Well, yay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
for watching. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.